Hello, my name is Björn. I will actually not introduce myself in detail now because this talk is anyway has a very personal touch. So implicitly, I will tell you about half of my life, essentially. I picked a very catchy title, so thanks for coming here. You probably thought it's a very cool Lord of the Rings reference or something. It might be referring to many things. We just like epic things, like ages, and we like things coming in threes. This is my suggestion for reference. Some people get it. Like some people who also like, as digital detox, like to play games made out of cardboard. I have a lot of SRE colleagues who like that. So this is part of my biography here. I worked as an SRE many years ago here in Dublin in the Google office. We had regular board game nights here with many SREs. Some of my former teammates are nodding. So even morally, our chairperson was there. This is actually the secret source. So we did this during our on-call sessions on the weekend, and we were really incentivized to keep the system stable so we can play our board games without interruptions. And even Niall Murphy did this now and then, and he didn't put it into the books. So that's the true now. Okay, but that's not actually the subject of my talk. So the reference is Seven Wonders is an excellent board game or cardboard game, whatever, and it plays through 3 H's. So first H. I could take the cards from the game and take photos, so I didn't have to use stock photography like all the other talks. So first H of SRE. By the way, this is all not rocket science. This is essentially my personal view of things, how history has unfolded in front of my eyes. You are really welcome to disagree with me. But of course, I'm not just doing this because I want to give a talk. I hope there's a bit of insight that will help all of you. There will even be concrete advice in the end. So first H of SRE was when SRE was proprietary to Google. Nobody had an idea what it is if they weren't already inside of Google. I got a call in 2005, recruiters telling me about this cool job, which I had no clue about, and they kind of coerced me to do those interviews, and then this Ben Traynor guy called me, and he was supposed to be really important or something. Whatever, I got the job, so many years I was very happy as an SRE at Google. But there was also something happening, little anecdote, true story. At some point, 2006, 2007, the recruiter said, we can't put SRE into job descriptions because nobody will ever apply to such mystery positions. They tried to actually replace this by other things like software engineer, google.com or something. Didn't help, unsurprisingly, but just keep this in mind. Very curious fact that SRE was actually killing the rich stream of applicants you got for any Google position back then. Okay, so for each H, I want to have a proverbial company doing SRE, a proverbial SRE company, and obviously the first H proverbial SRE company is Google itself. But let's not forget, Google was not the only internet giant. There is something in biology. I mean, I'm kind of have a biology background, so I like those metaphors. It's called convergent evolution. So even if something is completely independent, if you have to solve the same problem, you might come up with similar solutions. So I'm sure that in the other internet giants, they didn't have SRE, they didn't call it SRE, and they certainly did something different, but there were things that are similar, that are overlapping. So if I nominate Google as the SRE company of the first H, that shouldn't say that the others didn't do anything like that. Also, I mean, there were even convergent evolution things happening outside of internet giants. DevOps comes to mind, which also has an overlap with SRE. It's not a completely different thing, and similarities are mostly because of convergent evolution. So certain aspects of SREs happened outside of Google. Also, direct leakage in a way. So the retention rate of the early SRE teams was glorious, but sometimes some people left the company and went somewhere else and shared the experience. So there was also a more direct path of information flow about SRE. And at some point, eventually, SRE was something that people knew about. It was still pretty mysterious. It was cool. So we had the first instance of what I call SREno or something, SRE in name only, or SREno or something. So we could see that this SRE thing showed up attached to a thing that was totally not SRE. But also other people attached it to something that was kind of SRE, or they did something that was kind of SRE, but didn't have the name. Anyway, it became more and more public knowledge, which is kind of where the second age started. Second age of SRE, the driving force, in my opinion, was that, like, let's say 10 years plus minus after the internet giants faced certain problems with complexity and scalability, also quite normal internet enterprises faced the same problem. So they had to do something. And of course, it's a bit convergent evolution again. They have to come up with something that is more or less similar to SRE. But they also intentionally tried to learn from it. And we had those flows of information, like, for example, myself. I told you it's a personal story here. I left Google in 2013 and moved on to SoundCloud, along with a bunch of other ex-Google SREs. And we could do SRE there, or we couldn't. It's an interesting story. We'll talk about it in a few minutes. But for me personally, second age of SRE started in 2013, but that's an individual thing. A very non-individual thing might be May 2014. What happened in May 2014? Laura should know it. First SREcon ever in Santa Clara. Okay, so we have conferences named after SRE. This is the biggest ever. We have even books. This is the finest mark of the second age. Note that the cards are blue books. So I put 3 here because I already told you people like things coming in 3s. The first one is certainly undisputed, right? That came out in March 2016. So at latest, the second age of SRE started in March 2016. Workbook is the official follow-up. And then Seeking SRE, we'll talk about that later. I find that immensely important. Of course, we have more than 3 SRE books by now. These are just the 3 that I'm most closely linked to personally. So it's my personal choice again. So now we have conferences, we have books, we have a public exchange about SRE. So we have a real discourse, we can do real SRE. That doesn't prevent people from doing SRE SRE name only, because, I mean, yeah, managers often are that way, right? They just rename things. And now that SRE is like a buzzword, it happens even more often. But now we can talk about it. We can recognize it as an anti-pattern. And we had a talk on Wednesday. I'm very grateful that VTech did this, so I don't have to explain so much about it. It had this nice little thing, like ops was renamed SRE, expect traffic jam or something. So perfect description. If you haven't seen the talk, you can just go back to the video recordings that will be up on the conference website. I have to say, we just had an unconference couple of hours ago, and one of the questions was, or one of the topics, we should have an inclusive definition of SRE, not just always say, this is not SRE, I know what SRE is, and this is not SRE. So we should more say, what is actually SRE? And also in the unconference, we totally noticed there's a very diverse field, which is totally all SRE, but still, we still have those things like in the talk, where it's clearly not SRE. SRE in spirit, that's what I call it. SRE in spirit is so much better than SRE in name only. And that's why I like the third book so much, because, I mean, the first 2 books, they essentially codified SRE and made sure that we are actually all on the same page and we know what SRE is in the Google sense, and now we can apply it in our own way. But the Seeking SRE book is actually telling you about all of this. Many different organizations tell their story. Among others, SoundCloud tells their story. I was writing that chapter as well, together with colleagues. Yeah, so this is super interesting. My last year talk was a bit about that, and this is still second age, so I want to talk about the third age. I'm not going into way more detail here, but there's a curious fact. I read this blog post recently. We are the happiest and the highest paid in the industry. And this was actually triggering me giving this talk, because I had in mind, no, don't put SRE into job description. It kills the job description. Nobody will ever apply. And now All the recruiters put it into their job descriptions, if it makes sense or not. I guess there are now people who put it into their CV, if it makes sense or not, because it increases their salary expectations or something. So I like this. Like, this is kind of half through the hype cycle from, yeah, it's not happening to, it's now a buzzword. So if you go full through the hype cycle, what happens in the end? Either the thing that the hype was about just disappears because it was unreasonable in the first place, or we reach some reasonable level of application, some maturity. And the idea is that once we reach that, or out of this hype, we will reach the third age of SRE. Third age. Okay, so this is what I want to talk about here mostly. We're already 10 minutes in, so it's only half of the talk. But yeah, we are entering prophecy land now. Purple, my favorite color, so let me prophesize a bit. I want to have a few predictions about SRE in the third age. And to do that, we have to refine our understanding of second age SRE. So again, I'm personally biased. I'm mostly taking my SoundCloud experience as a model experience. And so I nominate SoundCloud as the proverbial second age SRE company. But as I said before, it's very diverse. Every organization is doing different things. They have to do different things, which is a good thing. But still, there is a bit of a common theme. And if you read through all of this Seeking SRE book, you can totally see that. In all this diversity, there is a common theme. You kind of get an idea what SRE in spirit means. And there is a theme in it if you have smaller companies. And now that like a lot of internet companies have to apply something like SRE, if they call it that way or not, many of them are actually fairly small. 50 engineers, even less. I mean, the number of engineers working for large companies is pretty large because a few large companies employ a lot of engineers, but if you just count companies, most of companies are small, right? So at this conference, you can totally see there's a lot of people on this situation, and then they have to think about, okay, we can't have like a dedicated SRE team for every single piece of critical infrastructure or critical product like Google. I mean, I started as an ads SRE, then I was an SRE just for the ad stats processing, and then I left, and now I talk to my colleagues, and they're like, SRE for the layer in between the two other layers or something like it's incredibly fine granular. A small company cannot do this. A small company might actually struggle to even have an SRE team at all. We had this talks. Matthew was really nicely, this was totally resembling my feelings about SoundCloud, what Matthew told us. Brian was a solo SRE. Then we had how to do SRE when you have no SRE. This happens as well. You only have some people with some hours. And Amy had this interesting thing about spreading the SRE culture to everywhere. I mean, I think everybody's talking about that all the engineers have to embrace SRE. But Amy, I found this very inspiring, even mentioned that non-technical people need to get involved. Legal people could get involved into SRE. Like, totally loved that. So, SoundCloud. My team at SoundCloud was called Production Engineering. It was explicitly not called SRE because in a way it wasn't really an SRE team. You can read about all the details. Spoiler alert, Laura already mentioned that. I'm at a different company now called Grafana because of third age. We'll talk about that in a minute. At the time I left, which is a couple of months ago, I knew exactly what the team was doing. And I assume they're still doing more or less the same thing. So I take this as a reference. SoundCloud had a quite successful journey from not being very reliable to being quite reliable. SRE goodness was spread throughout the company, as you can read in Seeking SRE. The question now is, what is the team actually doing now that they are kind of done, right? Site is reliable, everybody is a little part-time SRE. And that's an interesting question. So what are they doing? They're still doing important things, like they run the whole post-mortem process. They recognize cross-functional problems that are creating reliability problems. They drive that to solve that. They are just very senior. They are the final escalation point. Most of the runbooks end in, if all of this doesn't help and you are totally desperate, please page Branch and they will help you. So this is still kind of consulting and guidance, but I would argue this is more like an engineering leadership thing. It doesn't have to be a dedicated team or an SRE team if it just runs the postmortem process and recognizes cross-functional issues. And it's just very senior and helps people if whatever, shit hits the fan. But there's more. They are also running this whole cloud-native infrastructure, starting with Kubernetes, but they have a bunch of other things, like a very sophisticated DNS setup for historical reasons, monitoring, all those things. Now this sounds, if you look at the vendors in the hallway or in general, this sounds really like something that a modern, smallish company would not do on their own. If you run Kubernetes in the cloud, you get a Kubernetes as a service offer, right? But SoundCloud still has bare metal data centers, and they run Kubernetes in their own way on the bare metal thing, and then for consistency do the same in the cloud. That kind of makes sense for them. It's even pretty efficient, but like if this company were to be started today, they would probably take a very different development. Then there are still a bunch of dedicated machines where like old Debian distributions are running that are hitting their end of life point and have to be upgraded, and then somebody has to do it. And I mean, there are owners of those machines, but often it's prod-eng that goes around and reminds people or helps them or something. And this is like not a nice thing, this is toil. And again, if I start a company today, would I start bare metal Debian servers and put single instance MySQL, whatever, like doesn't happen today, right? You do something else. You want everything as a service in the cloud, something, right? So I can't nominate a third age SRE company right now, but perhaps there's one. But we can still speculate what is left for third age SREs. Now, all what I said sounds a bit like, yeah, sure, you just buy everything as a service in the cloud and then you don't need SREs anymore, right? Sounds horribly wrong, and it kind of is wrong, and it's also not new. 2012, you might know this blog post. It's the infamous no-ops blog post by Adrian Cockcroft. It sparked a lot of vicious replies by very important, famous people, and they had a very constructive discussion in the end, I guess, and in the end it was all a bit of a misunderstanding. So I guess it's a bit different, this whole SRE situation. Also, like, I guess back in 2012, most companies, like SoundCloud, still had to teach everybody SRE. But still, I think we can learn from that. We can avoid that misunderstanding. So my take on it is, if you actually start a company now, you follow all the best practices. Everybody is a part-time SRE already. They have all read the book, or they have like some experience before. Everything is a service. You run your actual value-added service on top of some cloud offerings. But still, you will have outages. You still have to do this favorite subject of non-abstract large system design, favorite SRE topic of mine. Niall Murphy last year told us on this conference that on-call should go away. It was this polemic against on-call, but actually on-call will not go away, right? You still have to carry pagers. And yes, even the cloud runs on real hardware somewhere on this planet, which you have to be aware of. But thinking about not needing SRE is like thinking about like this pre-DevOps thing where developers were thinking they have nothing to do with ops, and we realized this doesn't fly in the modern world. So it's the same thing. Essentially, everybody needs to think about SRE. And that's my punchline here. As a modern third age, smallish company, you won't need SREs, but you will need SRE. Everybody will need SRE. It's like, it's really hard to justify dedicated SRE teams and whatever they do in smaller companies, but in this modern way, this layer, the amount of work you have to invest into SRE tasks is becoming thinner, and everybody has to learn it anyway. So at some point, you don't really need SREs except in this consulting role, which you might have completed already in this ideal state. If they teach it at university, right? A slightly stretched metaphor is concurrent programming. Moore's law has ended, so we all have to do concurrent programming. But nobody ever started a concurrent programming engineering team that like takes the code of the normal developers and makes it concurrent or something. We all realized everybody has to do concurrent programming, and we teach it at university. So I hope, or I forecast, that we will have SRE at university. partially we already have that. I have a few friends in academia that do that. They don't call it SRE, but it's kind of leaking in. And then you are in this interesting situation where you hopefully hire people that already have an SRE experience. Or in other words, don't look for SREs when you're hiring. Look for an SRE mindset. Every single engineer you hire, and arguably perhaps even lawyers or whatever, they should have an SRE mindset. That doesn't mean they have to have all the knowledge, but this is what you learn to probe in interviews. If something is coachable, you don't have to look for it, but you have to check out if people are able to get into this. And if you do this, you don't have to hire SREs explicitly, and this is kind of weird, right? Full cycle, nobody wanted to even apply on SRE positions. Now SRE is a buzzword, it's everywhere in the job descriptions and in the resumes, and I'm telling you, you shouldn't even hire SREs. Everybody should be an SRE. Okay, there are exceptions, of course. So the first exception is if you're too large for the cloud, then this all doesn't apply. If you're Facebook, of course, you will still have dedicated SRE teams for all the things. But this is kind of back to space one. To stay with board games. SRE started with Internet Giants, and it will survive with Internet Giants. The other exception is if you are the cloud. If you're Amazon, Google, or Azure, you will still have SREs. Now, you might say this is just the same thing. Large companies and companies who are cloud providers. It's actually not. There are large companies who are not cloud providers. But even the other way around, there are cloud providers who are not as big, and there are something, I call it second-order cloud providers. These are people who offer you X as a service, which might be very close to SRE. You can look at all the vendors in the hallway. I mean, they're gone now, but you have looked at them for 3 days. They offer you something that is taking part of your SRE work as a service, and they don't run their own hardware. They run on Azure, Amazon, Google, wherever. And I mean, now we come to this complete cycle for my own life. Grafana is essentially that, right? They give you metrics, logs, zoom traces, dashboards as a service in the cloud. It's very SRE-ish, and they don't run their own hardware, of course. Like second-order cloud providers, and kind of we need SREs to give you the service of SREs. Okay, final point, the unconference again. I already mentioned that. It's about unsolved problems in SRE. This sounds like those problems is something the third age should solve for us or something. But I think many of the problems we discussed there are actually second age problems. They are still about like how do we transform a company into embracing SRE and stuff like that. That's what I think has to happen in the second age. And once you are done, you are like a third age company. But there are also other things, and what was really interesting was this inclusive definition of SRE, and it led to another question, this question of when in your career did you realize you're on SRE now, which is fairly interesting what actually made that happening. But then the most intriguing question was the final one, would you ever not be an SRE after you change roles or something? And most people said they can't unlearn this, they can't unsee the light, which kind of supports my idea of SRE spreading everywhere, transcending into a discipline from being a role, because everybody who ever had done SRE and is now doing something else will think in SRE terms, and they will, whatever they do, they will always have their little time slice where they act as an SRE. So yeah, this is my prediction. Most of the companies, in terms of counting companies, in the third age will not have dedicated SRE teams, they will not have dedicated SREs, but everybody has to be a little SRE. All right, I think we have 2 minutes for questions. Thank you so far.
We just got time for one question, I think, and I see Phil's hand up first.
What will be the fourth age of SRE?
Oh, I said people like things coming in threes, so there might not be a fourth age. Seven Wonders doesn't have a fourth age. Lord of the Rings has a fourth age, right? I don't know. I think, yeah, it's essentially complete, right? Once there will be no next age of concurrent programming because everybody is doing concurrent programming, and if everybody is doing SRE, that's where we settle.
So I think what you're saying is we can't automate ourselves out of a job for good, but we can preach ourselves out of a job?
Yeah, it's transcension.